The scorching sun beats down on the Tunisian desert. May 1943. The Afrika Corps has collapsed. Through waves of heat rising from the sand, we see a column of defeated German soldiers, their uniforms tattered and dust-covered, hands raised in surrender. Lieutenant Colonel Hans Reinhardt stands among them. At 42, he's a career officer who once commanded 300 men with precision and pride. Now he's just another prisoner, his iron cross hidden beneath his torn tunic, his face weathered by 3 years of desert warfare. Around him, younger soldiers whisper fears in German. They'll execute us. We'll be worked to death in mines. Remember what they said about the Americans, no mercy for Wehrmacht officers. Hans says nothing. He's seen enough war to know that propaganda flows from both sides. But he cannot deny the knot of dread in his stomach as American military police herd them toward waiting trucks. The journey to the coast takes 2 days. They're given water surprisingly clean and hardtack biscuits. No beatings. No degradation. Just silent, efficient processing. Hans notes this with the analytical mind that kept him alive through Tobruk and El Alamein. The Liberty ship that carries them across the Atlantic is cramped but not cruel. They sleep in holds designed for cargo. Yes, but the Red Cross parcels arrive regularly. Hans finds himself playing chess with a young private named Friedrich Baumann, a schoolteacher from Munich who was conscripted in 1941. "What do you think awaits us, sir?" Friedrich asks, moving his knight. Hans studies the makeshift board carved from a wooden crate by another prisoner. "I don't know, but I suspect it won't be what we've been told." 3 weeks later, they disembark in Norfolk, Virginia. The American shore looks impossibly green after years in North Africa's brown wasteland. They're loaded onto trains, passenger trains, not cattle cars, and given box lunches with actual meat sandwiches. Hans catches the eye of a young American sergeant, barely 20, with red hair and freckles. The sergeant offers him a cigarette through the window. "Welcome to America," the sergeant says in broken German. "You're going to Texas." Texas. Hans knows the name from American Western films he saw in Berlin before the war. Cowboys. And vast spaces. He never imagined he'd see it as a prisoner. The train cuts through the American heartland. Hans watches farms pass by intact, prosperous, untouched by war. Children wave from farmhouse porches. The contrast with bomb-cratered Europe strikes him like a physical blow. After 2 days of travel, they arrive at Camp Hearn, 70 miles northwest of Houston. The May heat reminds Hans of Africa, but everything else is different. As the trucks roll through the gates, topped with barbed wire and guard towers, Hans prepares himself for the worst. What he sees stops his breath. Inside the wire, neat wooden barracks stand in organized rows, but beyond them a soccer field, a building that looks like a theater. Men in German uniforms walking freely between buildings, carrying books, talking in small groups. No one is being beaten. No one is starving. Captain Robert Morrison, the American camp commander, addresses them in careful German during intake processing. He's a tall man in his 50s with gray temples and a Purple Heart ribbon from the First War. "Gentlemen, you are prisoners of war under the protection of the Geneva Convention. You will be treated with the dignity that international law requires. You will work, but you will be compensated. You will eat the same rations as American soldiers. You may write letters home, attend religious services, and participate in educational programs." Hans exchanges glances with Friedrich. This cannot be real. It must be a elaborate deception before the real imprisonment begins. But as they're assigned to barracks and given clean blankets, actual wool blankets, not thin rags, Hans begins to wonder if everything he believed about the enemy might be wrong. Hans wakes on his first morning at Camp Hearn to the sound of a bugle playing reveille. For a moment, he forgets where he is, reaching for his officer's cap, before remembering he's a prisoner now. The barracks holds 20 men, each with a metal frame bed, a footlocker, and a small shelf. It's Spartan but clean. Through the window, morning sunlight streams across what looks like a vegetable garden At breakfast formation, Hans experiences his first true shock. The mess hall is a proper building with tables and benches. American cooks, not guards, but actual army cooks, serve from behind a counter. The smell hits him first. Real coffee, not the ersatz chicory they'd been drinking in Africa. Bacon, fresh bread. Hans takes his tray in disbelief. 2 fried eggs, 3 strips of bacon, biscuits with butter, a cup of coffee with real cream. An orange. He sits beside Friedrich, who stares at his plate as if it might vanish. Around them, 300 German prisoners eat in stunned silence. Many haven't seen food like this in years. Some weep quietly. Across the mess hall, Hans notices a group of SS officers sitting apart, their faces hard with suspicion. One of them, Sturmbannführer Ernst Vogel, catches his eye and makes a subtle gesture, a reminder that loyalty to the Reich is still expected, even here. After breakfast, they're divided into work details. Hans is assigned to the camp maintenance crew, light carpentry and groundskeeping. The work is nothing compared to digging trenches under artillery fire. An American sergeant named Thomas Parker, a carpenter from Georgia, supervises their group with patient instruction rather than shouted orders. "Y'all know how to use a saw?" Parker asks in his thick southern drawl. Most don't. But Hans does. His father was a furniture maker in Bavaria. He demonstrates the proper technique, and Parker nods approvingly. "Good. We're building new shelves for the library." "Library?" Hans repeats in his careful English. Parker grins. "Yeah. Camp's got over 2,000 books now. English and German. You'll see." That afternoon, Hans tours the library, a converted barracks lined with donated books, technical manuals, classic literature, Shakespeare in both languages. A young corporal named David Brenner, a former teacher from Boston, runs the facility. "We believe in rehabilitation, not just detention," Brenner explains. "The war will end eventually. When it does, we want you gentlemen to return home as thoughtful citizens, not bitter enemies." Hans picks up a volume of Goethe's poetry banned in Germany for the author's humanist philosophy. "We couldn't read this at home," he murmurs. "Well, you can here," Brenner says simply. As days pass, Hans discovers more impossibilities. The camp has a theater troupe that performs German and American plays. A small orchestra practices Beethoven and Mozart. Classes teach English, mathematics, agriculture, and democratic philosophy. Prisoners plant gardens and keep the vegetables they grow. They receive small wages for their work, 10 cents per hour, paid in camp scrip that buys cigarettes, toiletries, and snacks at the canteen. Hans writes his first letter home to his wife, Anna, in Stuttgart. "Meine liebste Anna, you would not believe where I am. The Americans feed us better than our own army did in Africa. They treat us not as vermin but as men who happen to be on the wrong side of a conflict. I have a bed, books to read, and work that does not break my back. I feel guilt for this comfort while you suffer shortages at home. But I also feel something I had forgotten. I feel human again." He doesn't mention the SS officers who call men like him traitors for accepting American kindness, or the fact that he's starting to question everything he once believed about this war. 3 weeks into captivity, tensions emerge. Ernst Vogel and his loyalist group grow increasingly hostile toward prisoners who fraternize too freely with Americans or show enthusiasm for camp programs. One evening after dinner, Vogel corners Hans outside the barracks. 2 other SS men flank him, both young. Both true believers. "Reinhardt," Vogel says coldly, "I hear you're teaching English classes now." "I'm attending them," Hans corrects. "Captain Morrison suggested it would help with work assignments." "Captain Morrison," Vogel repeats mockingly. "You call your captor by his rank? With respect?" Hans keeps his voice level. "I call him what he is, just as he calls me Lieutenant Colonel Reinhardt, not prisoner number 1,847. They're softening you," Vogel hisses. "This comfort, this food, these privileges, it's all designed to make you forget who you are, to make you betray the fatherland." "I haven't forgotten anything," Hans replies quietly. "But I'm also not blind. These Americans don't torture us. They don't starve us. They follow their own laws, even with enemies. That makes them weak, does it? Or does it make them stronger than we ever understood? Vogel's face reddens. You sound like a traitor, Reinhardt. Be careful. The war isn't over. Germany will rise again. And when it does, collaborators will be remembered. That night, Hans lies awake, Vogel's words echoing. Is he collaborating simply by accepting humane treatment? By learning English? By beginning to see his captors as individual human beings rather than a faceless enemy? He thinks of Anna's last letter before his capture, describing food queues in Stuttgart. The constant air raids, the fear. He thinks of the dinner he ate tonight, beef stew with potatoes, green beans, fresh bread, apple pie. The same meal the American guards ate. The cognitive dissonance is overwhelming. The next morning, Friedrich approaches him during the work detail. The young teacher looks troubled. Colonel, I wanted your advice, Friedrich says quietly. Some of the men are planning something. I don't know what exactly. Vogel is organizing meetings after lights out. Hans nods grimly. Escape attempt? Maybe. Or worse, they talk about maintaining discipline and dealing with defectors. The problem is clear. The SS officers are trying to recreate the Reich's power structure inside the camp, complete with intimidation and potential violence against those they deem insufficiently loyal. Hans makes a decision that would have been unthinkable a month ago. He requests a meeting with Captain Morrison. Morrison receives him in the camp headquarters, a simple office with a desk, filing cabinets, and a fan that barely stirs the humid Texas air. Colonel Reinhardt, Morrison says, gesturing to a chair. What can I do for you? Hans sits, choosing his words carefully. Captain, there are tensions among the prisoners. Some men, they don't accept the legitimacy of our captivity. They see cooperation as betrayal. Morrison nods slowly. The SS contingent. Yes, I believe they may be planning something. I don't know what, but I thought you should know. The American captain studies him for a long moment. I appreciate your honesty, Colonel. May I ask why you're telling me this? Hans meets his gaze. Because I've seen enough death. And because, he pauses, searching for the right words. Because I'm beginning to understand that there are different kinds of strength. As summer deepens into the scorching Texas heat, Camp Hearn settles into routine. Hans discovers that prison camp life, while restricted, contains surprising richness. Each morning, work details disperse after breakfast. Hans's carpentry group has graduated from building shelves to constructing a proper stage for the camp theater. Under Sergeant Parker's patient guidance, they measure, cut, and assemble with growing skill. You've got a good hand with wood, Hans, Parker says one afternoon, examining a perfectly mitered corner joint. Your daddy teach you? He was a cabinet maker, Hans replies, wiping sawdust from his brow. I was supposed to join the business. But then the First War came, and after that, other paths. Parker nods knowingly. His own father lost a leg at Belleau Wood. War's got a way of changing plans. They work in companionable silence, the Georgia carpenter and the German officer, building something together instead of destroying it. In the afternoons, Hans attends English classes taught by Corporal Brenner. 20 prisoners gather in the library, their skill levels ranging from Friedrich's fluent English to others who barely know the alphabet. Brenner is endlessly patient. Remember, gentlemen, language is a bridge, Brenner says. When this war ends, and it will end, you'll return home. The world will need bridges, not walls. Hans practices writing in English. The sky is blue. The food is good. I am learning new things. Simple sentences that feel revolutionary. Evenings bring unexpected culture. The theater troupe rehearses plays. Last month was Schiller's William Tell. Next month will be Shakespeare's Much Ado About Nothing performed in English. Hans attends performances in the makeshift auditorium, watching men who spent years in combat now memorizing lines and building sets. The camp orchestra, conducted by a former Berlin Philharmonic violinist named Leopold Hartmann, practices 3 evenings a week. Hans has no musical talent, but he sits in the back row during rehearsals, letting Mozart wash over him. Music, he realizes, is another kind of bridge. On Sundays, a Lutheran pastor from Houston, Reverend William Schneider, grandson of German immigrants, conducts services. Catholics attend Mass with Father Patrick O'Malley, who speaks fluent German from seminary training in Bavaria. The Americans allow these services without interference, even providing hymnals. Hans writes regularly to Anna now. His letters describe this strange existence. We have planted a garden, tomatoes, beans, squash. The American sergeant gave us seeds and showed us how to manage them in this heat. Yesterday, I ate a tomato I grew with my own hands. It was perfect. I thought of our garden in Stuttgart and wept. We performed a play last night. I helped build the scenery. The Americans came to watch guards and officers sitting with us, applauding together. There was a moment, during the final scene, when I forgot where I was. I forgot about the war. I just saw human beings telling a story together. Anna, I don't know what to think anymore. We were taught that Americans were decadent, soft, lacking culture. But these men read poetry. They respect education. They believe in something beyond mere force. Perhaps we were wrong about many things. He doesn't send that last line. He's not sure it would pass the censors, American or German. But he thinks it, and thinking it changes something fundamental inside him. September 1943 brings hurricane season to Texas. Most storms stay coastal, but one Thursday evening, weather warnings crackle over the camp radio. Severe thunderstorms approaching. Possible tornado activity. Captain Morrison orders everyone to shelter positions. The prisoners file into the sturdiest barracks while wind begins to howl. Hans finds himself pressed shoulder to shoulder with Friedrich Leopold, the conductor, and about 40 others as rain hammers the roof like artillery fire. The storm intensifies. Lightning flashes continuously, turning night into stuttering daylight. The barracks shudders with each gust. A window blows out, showering glass across the floor. Men pray in German Protestants and Catholics united in fear. In the American guard quarters, the situation is equally tense. The building housing, the camp's food stores, has sprung a leak. Sergeant Parker and 5 others work frantically to move supplies away from the flooding water. Around midnight, the storm peaks. A massive gust tears part of the roof off the kitchen building. Rain pours directly onto the food storage area. Captain Morrison makes rapid decisions, ordering all perishables moved immediately to the guard barracks, the only building with an intact, waterproof basement. By dawn, the storm has passed, leaving behind broken branches, scattered debris, and a soggy, exhausted camp. As prisoners emerge for morning roll call, Morrison addresses them honestly. Gentlemen, the storm damaged our food storage. We've lost some supplies, and others are compromised. We've sent for emergency rations, but they won't arrive until tomorrow afternoon. We have enough food to feed either the guards or the prisoners, today's full rations, not both. An uneasy murmur runs through the formation. Hans tenses, wondering if this is where American kindness ends and survival instinct takes over. Morrison continues. However, the Geneva Convention is clear. Prisoners of war must be fed adequately. Therefore, the American personnel will take reduced rations today, while you receive your normal allocation. Stunned silence. Then Vogel's voice cuts through. A trick. They want us to feel grateful, so we'll be docile. But Hans sees the truth in Morrison's tired face. This isn't strategy, it's principle. That morning, the prisoners receive scrambled eggs, toast, and coffee as usual. The American guards eat crackers and canned beans. Hans watches Sergeant Parker share a tin of sardines with 2 other soldiers, none of them complaining. Something breaks inside him. After breakfast, Hans approaches Morrison again. Captain, may I speak with you? In Morrison's office, Hans stands at attention, a habit he can't break. Captain, I wanted to ask you something. Why did you give us the food? Your men have families too. They're far from home. They could have eaten, and we would have understood. Morrison leans back in his chair, looking every day of his 53 years. Colonel Reinhardt, in the last war, I was a prisoner myself. German camp, 1,918. 8 months before the armistice. Hans's eyes widen. He hadn't known. I was treated according to the rules. Morrison continues. Not well, but correctly. My captors were soldiers like me. Men following orders, trying to do their duty while maintaining their humanity. When I was repatriated, I made myself a promise. If I ever had authority over prisoners, I would remember that they're human beings first. Enemies second. He meets Hans's gaze. You asked why we gave you the food. The answer is simple. Because you're people. You're someone's husband, father, son. You deserve to eat, even if it means we go a little hungry for a day. Hans feels moisture on his cheeks and realizes he's crying. When was the last time he cried? Not in the desert. Not during the surrender. But here, confronted with simple decency, his composure crumbles. Thank you, he whispers. Thank you for seeing us. That evening, Hans gathers a group of prisoners carefully avoiding Vogel's loyalists. They pool their canteen resources, chocolate bars, cigarettes, hard candy, cookies. Hans presents the collection to Sergeant Parker. We wanted to share, Hans says in careful English. You gave us food. We give you this. Parker looks at the modest pile, then at the 20 German faces watching him hopefully. His eyes grow bright. Y'all didn't have to do that. Yes, Hans says firmly. We did. October brings cooler weather and, with the Red Cross mail delivery, letters from Germany. Hans hasn't heard from Anna in 5 months. He tears open the envelope with shaking hands. The letter is dated the 15th of August, 1943. My dearest Hans, I pray this reaches you and finds you well. Life here grows harder each week. The bombing has intensified. The British come by night, the Americans by day. We spend more time in the shelter than in our apartment. Food is desperately scarce. Our ration cards provide barely enough to survive. The children I see in the streets have hollow cheeks and old eyes. We eat turnips and black bread when we can get bread at all. I must tell you something terrible. Your brother Karl died in February. Not from combat, from hunger and cold. After Dresden was bombed, there was no heat, no food supplies. He simply grew weaker and weaker until his heart gave out. He was 46 years old. Hans, I don't tell you this to cause pain, but because you should know. Our world is collapsing. The radio tells us we're winning, but the reality around us speaks differently. I hope, wherever you are, that you are safe. That is all I can hope for now. Your loving wife, Anna. Hans reads the letter 3 times, each word a knife blade. His brother, funny, gentle Karl, who never wanted anything to do with politics or war, dead of starvation while Hans eats 3 meals a day. He stumbles outside, needing air. The October evening is pleasant, almost cool. From the mess hall comes the smell of dinner. Roasted chicken. The cooks are preparing for tomorrow. The contrast is unbearable. Hans walks to the edge of the compound, gripping the fence wire until it bites into his palms. Friedrich finds him there 20 minutes later. Sir, are you all right? My brother is dead, Hans says flatly. Starved to death in Dresden while I eat like a king in Texas. How is that fair? How is any of this fair? Friedrich has no answer. He simply stands beside Hans in silent companionship. That night, Hans cannot eat dinner. He sits in the mess hall, staring at the chicken on his plate, thinking of Anna gnawing turnips, of Karl's hollow cheeks, of German children with old eyes. Sergeant Parker notices. Hans, you feeling sick? My brother died, Hans manages. At home, from hunger. Parker's expression shifts to deep sympathy. He sits down across from Hans, something he rarely does. I'm real sorry to hear that. How can I eat this? Hans gestures at the meal, knowing what they suffer. Because starving yourself won't fill their bellies, Parker says gently. Because staying alive and staying strong is how you honor him. Because, he pauses, searching for words. Because maybe, when this is all over, People like you can help make sure nobody starves again. Hans looks up, seeing genuine compassion in the American's weathered face. The war's turned everything upside down, Parker continues. Enemy gives you food while your own country can't. That's not your fault. That's just the madness of war. But you're still here. You're still alive. And that means something. Hans picks up his fork. Each bite tastes like ashes, but he eats because Parker is right. His survival is the only thing he can control now. That night, he writes another letter to Anna, one he knows may never arrive. I carry guilt like a stone, but I will survive this. I will come home to you. I promise. As 1,943 turns to 1,944, Camp Hearn evolves beyond mere detention into something unexpected. A community of learning. The American command, recognizing that the war will eventually end and these men will return to Germany, begins to emphasize what they call civic rehabilitation. A new program launches in January. Democracy and Governance, taught by Corporal Marcus Goldstein, a political science graduate from Columbia University, who was drafted in 1942. His family fled Poland in 1920, making his perspective unique. Gentlemen, Goldstein begins his first class, addressing 40 prisoners who voluntarily enrolled. This course is not propaganda. I'm not here to tell you that democracy is perfect or that America has no flaws. We have plenty. But I am here to explore with you how free societies function, how citizens participate in government, and how laws protect rather than oppress. Vogel and his loyalists boycott the class, calling it Jewish brainwashing. But Hans attends, hungry for understanding. They study the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the concept of checks and balances. They discuss the Weimar Republic, what went right, what failed, why democracy collapsed in Germany. The conversations are intense, sometimes heated, but always respectful. What if the people choose wrongly? Asks Leopold Hartmann during one session. What if they elect someone dangerous? That's the risk of freedom, Goldstein replies. But it's also why education matters, why a free press matters, why protecting minority rights matters. Democracy requires engaged citizens, not blind followers. Hans absorbs these ideas like water on parched ground. He's been a soldier most of his adult life, following orders, trusting authority. These discussions force him to think differently about governance, duty, and individual responsibility. As spring arrives, plans begin for a Christmas celebration. Odd timing, but the Red Cross has sent decorations and materials delayed from the previous year. Captain Morrison approves a joint event. German prisoners and American personnel celebrating together. Reverend Schneider approaches Hans one afternoon. Colonel Reinhardt, I'm organizing the Christmas service. We'd like to sing Silent Night in both German and English alternating verses. Would you help lead the German portion? Hans is surprised. I'm not much of a singer, Reverend. Neither am I, Schneider smiles. But it's symbolic. The song was written in Austria, sung by both sides during the First War's Christmas truce. It reminds us of our common humanity. Hans agrees. An unexpected addition to the camp comes in March. 7-year-old Timothy Morrison, the captain's grandson, visiting during spring break, while his father is deployed in the Pacific. The boy is fascinated by the German prisoners, viewing them with uncomplicated curiosity rather than fear. Timothy wanders the camp, under guard supervision, watching the orchestra rehearse, visiting the gardens. He strikes up a friendship with Leopold, who teaches him basic piano on the chapel's upright. One afternoon, Hans watches Timothy give Leopold a drawing, crude crayon picture of the two of them at the piano. Leopold's eyes mist over. My daughter was his age, Leopold says quietly after Timothy leaves. I haven't seen her in 4 years. Hans nods understanding. They're all fathers separated from children, husbands separated from wives. The war has stolen years that can never be recovered. The planned Christmas service, held in March for bureaucratic reasons, becomes a remarkable event. 200 prisoners and 50 American personnel gather in the chapel, Decorations hang from the rafters, paper snowflakes made by Timothy, carved wooden stars made by the carpentry crew. When they sing Silent Night, voices blend in German and English. Stille Nacht, Heilige Nacht. Silent Night. Holy Night. Hans's voice cracks on the final verse. Around him, men from both sides cry openly. In this moment, they're not enemies, just human beings longing for peace, for home, for an end to suffering. After the service, Timothy runs up to Hans and presents him with a wooden toy soldier Hans carved for the carpentry display. Grandpa says you can keep it. For peace. Hans kneels down to the boy's level. For peace, he agrees. His English much improved now. Thank you, Timothy. May 1944 brings an unexpected arrival. General Lieutenant Karl von Stenger, captured after the Normandy invasion's early phases. At 61, von Stenger is old-school Prussian military, stiff-bearing, aristocratic background, veteran of both world wars. His arrival creates a stir among the prisoners. Some see him as a symbol of the true Germany. Others worry his presence will embolden hardliners like Vogel. Captain Morrison receives von Stenger formally, with the courtesy due his rank. The general is assigned private quarters, a small room rather than barracks, and given the same privileges as other officers. For the first 3 days, von Stenger maintains cold distance. He observes everything with sharp, analytical eyes but speaks to no one except when necessary. He refuses to attend chapel services, classes, or entertainment. On the 4th day, Hans is assigned to brief the general on camp procedures. They meet in von Stenger's quarters, the older officer seated ramrod straight in his chair. Lieutenant Colonel Reinhardt, von Stenger acknowledges crisply. I understand you've been here nearly a year. Yes, Herr General. Since May 1943. And you find the conditions acceptable? Hans chooses his words carefully. The Americans treat us according to international law, sir. Better than the law requires, in fact. Von Stenger's expression remains neutral. I see. Over the following weeks, von Stenger observes camp life with the same intensity he once studied battlefields. He watches work details, attends an orchestra rehearsal, observes the democratic governance class from the back row. He says little, but Hans senses the general's worldview being quietly challenged. The turning point comes during a Sunday church service. Young Timothy Morrison is visiting again, and during the fellowship after service, he approaches von Stenger with characteristic innocence. Are you a general? Timothy asks, staring at von Stenger's worn uniform. I am, von Stenger replies stiffly. My grandpa's a captain. He's nice. Are you nice? The question, so childlike and direct, cracks something in von Stenger's formal armor. A smile, probably his first in months, touches his lips. I try to be. Do you want to see my drawing? Mr. Leopold helped me draw music notes. Von Stenger examines the crayon drawing Timothy presents with the same attention he once gave battle maps. This is quite good, young man. That evening, von Stenger requests a meeting with Captain Morrison. Hans, present as a translator, though both men speak adequate English, witnesses the conversation. Captain Morrison, von Stenger begins. I must confess something. I arrived here expecting a prison. Harsh conditions, minimal rations, forced labor. That is what we were told about American camps. And what have you found, General? Von Stenger pauses, a lifetime of military dignity weighing against honesty. Finally, I have found something I did not expect to find anywhere in wartime. And what's that? Humanity. Dignity. Civility. Von Stenger's voice carries wonder. If there is such a thing as heaven on earth, Captain, I believe this may be as close as one finds during war. The phrase spreads through the camp like wildfire. Heaven on earth. It becomes shorthand for the cognitive dissonance they all feel, imprisoned yet treated with respect, defeated yet not degraded, enemies yet not dehumanized. The months blur together. Summer heat, autumn cooling, another Christmas properly celebrated in December 1944, then spring 1945. News from Europe grows increasingly dire for Germany. The prisoners listen to radio broadcasts uncensored, another American peculiarity hearing about their nation's collapse. When Hitler's death is announced on the 1st of May 1945, the camp falls into strange silence. Some prisoners seem relieved, others are devastated. Vogel and his hardcore loyalists retreat into sullen defiance, but they're a minority now. VE Day comes on the 8th of May 1945. The war in Europe is over. Captain Morrison gathers everyone, guards and prisoners, in the Central Assembly area. His voice carries exhaustion and relief. Gentlemen, the war has ended. Germany has surrendered unconditionally. You remain prisoners of war until repatriation arrangements can be made, but the killing has stopped. For that, we can all be grateful. No one cheers. The moment is too heavy, too complex. Hans thinks of Anna, prays she survived the final collapse. He thinks of his destroyed country, wondering what will remain. Repatriation begins slowly in late 1945, complicated by Germany's occupation and devastation. Some prisoners will return to Soviet-controlled zones, others to American or British sectors. All face uncertainty. On a crisp October morning, Hans's group is scheduled for departure. He packs his few possessions: the wooden soldier Timothy made, English books he's been given, letters from Anna that arrived sporadically. His latest letter from her, dated September, describes Stuttgart as rubble and ruins but confirms she's alive. Sergeant Parker finds Hans during the final hour. The two men stand awkwardly, suddenly conscious that this is goodbye. You take care of yourself. Hans, Parker says, his voice thick. Build something good over there. I will try. Hans replies in English. That's now fairly fluent. Thomas, thank you. For treating us like men. Like human beings. Hell, that's just basic decency. No, Hans says firmly. It is not basic. It is rare. It is precious. You gave me back my faith in humanity, when I thought I had lost it forever. They embrace the Georgia carpenter and the German officer, holding on perhaps longer than strictly necessary. Friedrich is crying openly as he says goodbye to Corporal Brenner, who's given him a recommendation letter for university teaching positions. Leopold receives hugs from half the camp. His orchestra played together one final time last night, Beethoven's Ninth, the Ode to Joy bringing down the house. Even von Stenger, dignity mostly intact, shakes Captain Morrison's hand with genuine warmth. Captain, you have shown me that civilization can survive even war. I will not forget. As the trucks roll through the gates one last time, this time carrying them toward ships and home, Hans looks back at Camp Hearn. The barracks, the chapel, the gardens, the library. This place that was supposed to be his prison became something else entirely. A refuge, a school, a reminder that humanity persists even in humanity's darkest hours. He touches the wooden soldier in his pocket. For peace. Auf Wiedersehen, he whispers. 20 prisoners from Hans's barracks have filed paperwork requesting to immigrate to America after the mandatory repatriation period. They want to live in the country that imprisoned them, because it's where they felt most free. Hans understands completely. 20 years later. 1965. Hans Reinhardt, now 64, returns to Texas. He's a successful furniture maker in Stuttgart, having rebuilt his father's business from ruins. His daughter Maria teaches English at gymnasium. His son Peter studies engineering. Anna, gray-haired but smiling, accompanies him on this journey. They drive through Hearn on a warm spring morning. The camp is mostly gone now, barracks dismantled, land returned to agriculture, but the chapel remains, maintained by the local historical society. Captain Morrison, retired and living in Houston, meets them there. The two old soldiers embrace without hesitation. Morrison is 75 now, white-haired and slower, but his eyes remain kind. Colonel Reinhardt, good to see you again. Please, Robert, it's Hans. I haven't been colonel in 2 decades. They tour the chapel together, memories flooding back. The place where they sang Silent Night, where Reverend Schneider preached about redemption, where Hans first began to believe in a future beyond war. A small memorial has been erected, a plaque with both English and German text, Camp Herne, 1943 to 1945. Here, enemies learned to see each other as human beings. Here, in the midst of war, humanity prevailed. Hans places a wreath at its base, German and American flags intertwined. "I wanted to thank you properly," Hans tells Morrison. "What you did here, what all of you did, it saved us. Not just our lives, but our souls. You could have treated us as monsters. Many would have said we deserved it. But you treated us as men who had made mistakes, men who could learn better." Morrison's eyes grow moist. "We just tried to do what was right. You did more than that. You proved that civilization doesn't have to die during war. That mercy can exist alongside justice. That enemies today can become friends tomorrow." They walk together through the overgrown garden plots. Hans points out where he planted tomatoes 32 years ago, where the orchestra rehearsed, where Timothy Morrison drew pictures in the dirt. "Whatever became of Timothy?" Hans asks. Morrison smiles. "He's a lawyer now. Civil rights work." Says growing up hearing stories about this place taught him that all people deserve dignity, no matter who they are. As the sun sets over the Texas landscape, Hans and Anna stand at the old camp gate, the entrance that once filled him with dread. He thinks about the man he was in 1943, hardened by war, suspicious, locked into rigid thinking. He thinks about the man he became here, open to learning, capable of change, reclaiming his humanity. "Thank you," Hans says to Morrison, "to the empty camp, to the memory of all who served here, guards and prisoners alike. Thank you for teaching us that the greatest victory is not in defeating an enemy, but in helping them become a friend." Morrison nods. That's the only victory that lasts. As they drive away, Hans watches the chapel recede in the mirror. The place where enemies became students, where prisoners became free, where heaven existed for a few brief years on earth. The seeds planted here grew into something remarkable. Former prisoners who returned to Germany and became teachers, civic leaders, proponents of democracy, men who remembered American kindness and paid it forward, rebuilding their shattered nation with lessons learned in a Texas prison camp. The war created millions of victims. But here, in this small corner of Texas, it also created something else. Proof that humanity can survive humanity's worst impulses, that treating people with dignity, even enemies, plants seeds that bloom for generations. Hans touches the wooden soldier in his pocket, carried for 20 years. For peace, he thinks. For peace.